Good morning. Thank you everyone so much for joining us for the August virtual caregiver workshop. My name is Candace Christensen and I'm the coordinator for the Caregiver Coalition in Northeast Florida. We started these workshops and it was a response to COVID-19 because we wanted to continue to bring you updated resources and information and support from caregiving experts. So the past workshops that we've had have been very information heavy, and this month we wanted to kind of take a step back to sort of check in. I really encourage you to try and dedicate this next hour to you, yourself. Think about how you're doing. How are you coping with juggling responsibilities and with the added stress of physical distancing and the uncertainty that we're facing due to the pandemic? And are you making sure to take care of yourself? So that's kind of what we're going to be covering in this session, and I'm thrilled to introduce our speaker, Rachel Weinstein. Rachel, thank you so much for spending your Saturday morning with us. Rachel is the coordinator of community engagement at Baptist Health AgeWell Center for Senior Health, and she also works independently as a grief counselor and educator. She holds a bachelor's degree in applied health science and a master's degree in education with a specialty in counseling, both of these from Indiana University of Bloomington, Indiana. Rachel spent the early part of her career as a general therapist before specializing in the area of grief, loss, and life transition. She's been featured as a grief expert on MSNBC, in USA Today, the Chicago Tribune, and over 50 radio programs discussing various aspects of coping with grief. So thank you again, Rachel, for sharing your time with us. Before I have Rachel get started, I want to go over a few housekeeping items. First off, this session is being recorded and will be posted to our website. All cameras and microphones, except for those of our speakers, have been turned on. And we ask that you remain muted until we reach the Q&A session. This just makes it easier to hear the speaker and to understand what's going on. If you haven't already, you may want to turn on speaker view in the top right corner of your Zoom screen so you can better see the speakers. If you find yourself with any questions during the first half of our workshop, please type them in the chat box and I'll make sure that they get answered. When we begin the Q&A, please type your question into the chat box and I will read it out to our experts. At the end of our session, we'll be holding a short poll on what you liked and didn't like about the session, and that just helps us continue to improve the workshops as we go on. Everybody that fills out the survey will be eligible to win a $50 Amazon gift card. We'll reach out to the winner by email after the session. And lastly, in case we run into some technical difficulties, please be patient. We'll try our best to resolve them as quickly as possible. So again, for the next hour or so, Rachel is going to take us on a walk through understanding stress, grief, and how it affects us, and then what we can do to keep from getting overwhelmed. Rachel, I'll go ahead to your slides. The floor is all yours. You're muted, Rachel.
Okay, you can hear me now?
I can hear you now.
Okay, great. Well, welcome everybody. I'm so glad to quote unquote see you. This is a new world for everybody, this virtual experience, but it enables me to reach more people more easily. So for that, I'm very grateful. So like Candace said, I would love you to just do your best to be fully present and just focus on you. We're going to be learning some new things about the connection between grief and caregiving and stress and what happens in our bodies when we endure stress, particularly when we're trying to ignore it and go about what we have to do. That has a big impact on our well-being. And so I'm going to explain a little bit about why that is. So I'm also going to be at the end of each slide asking Candace to kindly advance the slide. So let's get into caring for yourself as you care for others. So this is what we're going to cover today. We're going to talk about how not only stress but grief is part of caregiving. And I did read in advance the answers to the introductory question that you answered, many of you or most of you did when you registered. And gosh, I read all kinds of really heart-wrenching circumstances, a lot of grief out there, a lot of loss, a lot of change, and various circumstances related to grief, loss, and caregiving. So I'm so glad you're all here. We're going to learn also about the symptoms and the similarities between stress and grief and how they impact your health. I'm, of course, going to give you some practical tips to manage your stress as a caregiver and unrelated to caregiving just in general. And we're also going to do some hands-on exercises that are kind of fun to help you create personal comforts using your 5 senses, and then one to help you identify the right people to support all of the different emotions that you have. Well, not all of them, but you'll see. It's hopefully going to be enjoyable for you. So just sit back and take a look at the slides. If anybody wants any of the information that I go over afterward, I'd be more than happy to share that with you. So don't feel like you have to take notes or do anything other than listen. And you can always get this information from me through Candace afterward. Okay, next slide, please. So some basics before we begin. Let's talk about who can claim themselves as a caregiver. You know, one thing that I can assure you is that caregivers are often the last ones to identify themselves as caregivers. We sometimes think that caregiving means simply, you know, hands-on, you know, changing of bandages and all kinds of other duties that we think of when we think of caregiving more traditionally, but caregiving includes so much more. You're a caregiver if your mental space, your energy, of course, your time, your dedication, your investment to another is great, and you are highly invested in the well-being of another person. And there are all kinds of variations of that. So you can claim yourself as a caregiver if that is you, if whether it's an adult child, a young child, a spouse, a parent, if you're trying to manage and check in on them from afar, or if you're close by, if they're living with you or not, you can claim yourself as a caregiver. So you're right where you belong today. So what is at stake as a caregiver? Well, one thing is for sure, that everybody has stress, but caregivers have a lot more of it. And what's at stake as a caregiver with stress that is high, but time that is low, is your health and your well-being. And why that's important, why it should matter. Well, you want to not only hopefully remain here on this earth and well, but you also want to be able to support those you love and care about, the one you care for, or the ones you care for. So what's at stake is your very own health and well-being, and what could be more important than that? So often we try to put others in front of us all the time, particularly if we're in a caregiving role, but I know it's cliched, you probably have heard it a lot before, but even on the plane, when they ask us first to put the oxygen mask on ourselves before we help the one next to us, one that we care for, a child or whomever, that's because we need to have that oxygen in order to be alert and awake and able to care for someone else. So it's really, it is a little cliched, but it still fits, that taking care of yourself is not quote unquote selfish in a negative way, it's necessary. And then how can we do anything about it when we already have such little time as caregivers? So that's what I'm going to cover today. Those are some basics. Okay, Candace? So stress and grief, let's talk about how they're related. A lot of people don't recognize that grief is actively involved in caregiving, in stress. But I'm going to use stress and grief somewhat interchangeably, and I'll show you why that is. Stress, according to Webster's dictionary, I looked it up just to make sure I was accurate, pressure or tension exerted on an object. Anybody out there feeling pressure or tension? Anybody? I would imagine all of us. So, but it includes not just what we feel, but our physical, emotional, and our cognitive, our intellectual brain health related responses. So grief is a natural emotional, physical, cognitive, and spiritual. So I'll talk a little bit about that in a moment, but the connection between the two is all of the symptoms they give us. There is so much overlap. So stress and grief really are related. You really can't have a loss or a change in anything important to you, anything in which you've been invested, without feeling stress and having your body exude that stress and show you symptoms of it. So they're really interchangeable. Okay, thank you, Candace. Grief and caregiving. So let's talk about what you've lost, which is where the grief part comes in. Because of your role as a caregiver, and even if you don't identify to, I saw all kinds of different responses in the introductory question, and many of them were unrelated to caregiving, but certainly related to grief. So keep that in mind, please. I don't want to exclude anybody in this question. But what have you lost because of your role as a caregiver or in your grief? Have you lost time, privacy, pursuit of activities you once enjoyed, finances, sleep? I'm sure there are other things too. That's where the grief comes in. And what has changed for you is also indicative of grief because you're a caregiver. Is it the relationship you have to one that you care for or cared for? Identifying now as a caregiver versus a partner, a spouse, a lover, your routine, your relationship or relationships to friends, to other family members. They can be fraught with challenges, disappointments, angst. Our relationships can be really challenged. So you can start to see the connection between loss and change and caregiving. Okay, Candace. So here are what I call the, there's an acronym for this, PIES: physical, intellectual, emotional, and spiritual. This is something I talk about a grief counselor, but when I looked at the laundry list of symptoms of grief and those of stress, they are so similar. It's almost the only real distinction is at the last one with under the spiritual category. Stress and spirituality is a lot less of an issue, but grief and a spiritual challenge is much more common. So let me briefly explain what this chart is about. The physical responses that we have to grief: headache, your heart racing, breathing shallow breaths, sleep disturbances, appetite changes. That could mean that you find yourself hungrier or not as hungry, or some of both intermittently. Increased thirst, and stomach and digestive issues. These are just some. I mean, there are literally almost 100 different kinds of physical responses that we have to stress and grief. I'm wondering out there how many of you can check these off as things that you have or are experiencing currently. Emotionally, our responses to stress and to grief: anger and irritability. It's not just sadness. When we grieve, it can also come out as anger or irritability, short temper, sadness, of course, guilt and regret, emotional numbness or feeling of just like going through motions, feeling of overwhelm. Often when I ask people in grief what's hardest for them and they say everything, that's overwhelm. That's overwhelm. Intellectual and cognitive changes. So interestingly, stress and the stress involved in grief has, it's called, let's see, let me think of a simple way to put this. When we were kind of Neanderthals and were just purely operating primitively and we were in danger, we had to flee, right? So all of our energy went to our feet to move. It's called a reptilian response. And so that means even the leftovers for us today, even though we're more evolved as human beings, is that when we're under stress, when we feel some external pressure or threat, all of the energy leaves our head and our thinking, our brains, and goes elsewhere. So naturally, your memory is going to be lower, your concentration is going to be lower, difficult time making decisions, feeling like you're on autopilot or just going through the motions. These are natural responses. This is not just a mind over matter kind of thing. So if you're feeling if you're blaming yourself for not feeling more together or feeling kind of spacey, this is a primitive, natural, normal response to stress and grief. And we're going to talk about things that we can do for each of these things. And then the spiritual, something I talk about in grief work, and I'll separate the spiritual from the religious, but loss, a change in something, or something significant to us, we start to question life's meaning. We might challenge previously held beliefs. We might lean more heavily into them. But to be sure, we're confronted with some spiritual questions when we struggle with loss and change. Okay. Thank you, Candace. So how can the symptoms of stress and grief impact our health? A lot of you have probably heard about people who pass away within a short time of each other. And a lot of people think that's only a kind of a spiritual, their heart was just broken and they had to go be with their loved one. And that certainly may be the case. I'm not judge and jury about that, but I also want to speak to some of the science behind what happens when we endure grief and stress. And I'm going to use them interchangeably. So for the purposes of this presentation, if you see stress, just know that it's also involves grief. Okay, Candace, let's take a look at some of the reasons behind it. So there are three main ingredients to what I'm talking about here. Cortisol, a lot of you have heard about. It's the stress hormone. It's what is released in our bodies when when stress is dumped into our beings. DHEA is a hormone that's produced by our adrenal testosterone. It falls as we age. So that's one of the players of the ingredients here. And the last one are neutrophils, and they're the most plentiful type of white blood cells that assist. So when cortisol is dumped in, DHEA and neutrophils kind of go to work. Okay. So the stress hormones and the relationship to illness and vulnerability is kind of like a scale. When cortisol is dumped in, neutrophils and DHEA go to work to try to balance everything and keep everything even. All right, so that cortisol doesn't take over and start to wreak havoc in the body. So struggles to find balance, like I said, sorry about that, number 3 by the DHEA, that was not supposed to be there. But when cortisol is really heavy, a lot of things can impact how well the neutrophils and DHEA can behave and start to lower that scale toward being more balanced. And let me share with you what impacts the ability of neutrophils and DHEA. So this is based on research. I didn't make any of this up. I just made some graphics. When a younger person is stressed out, that little symbol next to the arrow is the yin yang that just symbolizes balance and harmony. So when a younger person is stressed, our cortisol and our neutrophil and DHEA levels are able to balance really well. They're strong, and we get older, however, we have what's been identified as reduced neutrophil function. Those are the infection-fighting hormones. And because of that, it's much harder to get that cortisol imbalance corrected, and a cascade of events happen. All of the, let me show you in the next slide, if you could advance it. Thank you. So at the top, we've got grief or stress. So that's introduced into our being. Then we've got, to the right, number 2, cortisol is then the response that happens to our grief and stress, which triggers one of the hormones, DHEA, to get on board, which hormone to get active. And in turn, that affects our immunity. So the cycle here, as you can see, is just that when grief or stress is introduced and the stress hormone is dumped into the body, those two other hormones have to be really healthy and active. But as you get older, we have less ability to have balance there. And so what's impacted most is number 5, our immunity. And that's really the science behind why people get sick more often when they're stressed out, why people can catch infections and even fatal infections that they can't fight off because of the enormous amount of cortisol circulating in their system, the reduced ability to fight off infection, and therefore, the impact to our body and often our life. So that's really what's at stake, everybody. I just wanted to give you a little bit of science behind it. Okay. So what can we do to lower our stress and protect our health? So first, practical things. One thing to consider is recruiting additional. So when it comes to your own circumstance, whatever it may be, consider either a formal, of course this is dependent often on what finances will allow, but not always. Some of us have the ability to have friends or loved ones that can come in and help to take over some of the more challenging tasks that we have, or allow us to, whether it's get in a nap or spend time taking a walk or taking a bath, whatever it might be. Recruiting additional help is paramount to lowering your stress. You cannot do everything yourself all the time. Support groups, listen, not everybody is a group joiner, but you can be creative in what you defined as a support group. Something like this could be just a one-time or an ongoing way to connect with other caregivers. You could start a group. You can and talk to someone on a helpline. So you can, I don't know if chat rooms are still possible. I might be dating myself by saying that, but a lot of folks, certainly online, Facebook and so on, you can be connected to others who are experiencing similar challenges that you are, and get camaraderie there. There. Improving your relationship simply means that the research shows that the better your relationship is with the one or ones that you care for, the lower your stress. So if you can do whatever you need to do, whether that is hire a counselor to help you rid yourself of resentments and old hurts, perhaps that you haven't quite gotten over as you set out to care for somebody else, or you're engaged in caregiving for someone with whom you've had somewhat of a difficult relationship in your past, that would be ideal. Avoid isolation. Of course, here we are in the area of COVID, and I read that. I got this particular piece of information from some research, but I read that and I thought, well, that's one of the challenges. Just a walk, even if it means having a socially distanced time with a friend or another family member. You are getting out of the house, which is the next one. And again, it could be a drive, it could be a walk, something that gets you at least out of your environment some period of the time each day. Respite care, so important. If your finances allow it all, please consider whether it's adult. A lot of schools for healthcare, the students need to give volunteer hours, so you can get creative and think about how you could engage those students in doing their volunteer work for you and or your loved ones. Get your finances in order. Get somebody to help you. Doesn't matter how much you have, but making sure that somebody is helping you look through insurance policies, allowances that may be available to you, state, local, federal, And these things change from year to year. So make sure you stay tuned in to what changes there may be each year and that you can stay on top of that. And then last but not least, please do find objective expert support for yourself if you need it. You don't have to be in total crisis to reach out to somebody to benefit from their expertise and availability to be there for you, particularly sometimes somebody who's really neutral, who's not too involved in your personal life. It's not going to be sitting in judgment of you. You can have some neutrality there. I highly encourage. And of course, at the end, I'll share a way to reach out to me, but there are a lot of other resources as well in the community. Okay, Candace? So let's take a look at personalizing your stress relief. Am I dating myself by saying, Calgon, take me away? Does anybody remember that commercial? Let's take a look at some hands-on ways that you can personalize your stress relief. So I believe that everybody have, but can at least come to the table with at least one 8.5 by 11 piece of paper, just standard piece of paper. What we're going to do is make 5 columns, and we're going to head each of the column with the following: sight, sound, taste, touch, and scent. So it's going to look like this. It's going to look like that. You don't have to have a certain number of boxes, just columns. They certainly don't need to be straight, just basically 5 columns and a line across. Okay, so what brings you comfort? And the goal of this exercise is to have fun with it, add to it as you come across things that you discover are pleasing to you, and see how many different ways you can incorporate each of these sense-pleasing identifications into your everyday environment, with what you're wearing, with what you have around you, so on. Let me explain. So Candace, if you could go to the next slide, please. So you're just going to fill in one by one. For the sake of this, for time today, see if you can do just one on each column. Something that pleases you. So what is it that you, when your eye rests upon it, you like to look at it? Is it a certain color? Is it? I just gave you some examples based on some of the things that I like. For sound, what is it that's pleasing to your ear? Is it a certain type of music? Is it a certain musician? Is it a crackling fire? Thank God for YouTube, because I pull up more stuff on YouTube to help me de-stress and go to sleep or relax, and everything is available to you on YouTube. The sound of rain. Last night I played based on what was happening outside on the porch when I was outside last night, and the wind was blowing through the trees, and I love that sound. I loved it so much that I decided to put it into YouTube and find it. And as I went to sleep last night, I was listening to that on my. What are some of your taste-pleasing foods? For me, ice cream, or my mom's meatloaf recipe, or even just a caramel or 2 or 3 or 4. Touch. What's pleasing to your sense of touch? Fleece, flannel sheets, a massage, petting your animal. And for scent, what pleases your sense? So for me, cookies baking. I love vanilla candles, so one of those burning, or fresh bread baking. Sometimes if I really don't want to cook, but I just want to make the scent in my home pleasing, I'll just take a pot of water and I'll sprinkle in some cinnamon. And if I have an apple that's kind of going bad, but not rotten or anything, it's just something I won't eat, I'll just slice it up and throw it in there. It smells like apple pie. I love doing that just to make my house smell delicious. So that is a simple exercise that I would love for you to keep adding to how it is, but indulging your senses is a really inexpensive, easy way to lower your stress level. And one thing that's kind of fun about this is that you can see how many of these senses you can combine. So if you could, the next slide, please, I'll show you what I mean. Okay. So make the list as long as you can. I think I'm going to show you that in a second. Have fun with it. Add new things when you discover them, and see how many things that please your senses can be combined. So this is the next slide I was talking about. There you go. So this is a way to combine senses. Things like, just as an examples only, cover yourself with a soft blanket in a fabric that you love while you listen to some music or a cologne, a perfume that you love onto your pillowcase. That combines scent and touch. So you could watch the sunset, which is sight, while eating an ice cream cone, just as an example. So little things that you can do to combine your pleasure of your senses is actually even better. So it's kind of a stress relief 2.0 if you can combine them. Okay, next one, Candace. And here's our second exercise. We're going to identify a personal support system. We're going to find out in your life who's good with what emotion. So you can take that piece of paper that you have, or another one, whichever you choose, turn it over. And what we're going to do, if you could, next slide please, is trace your hand. Remember that exercise we did when we were in school and we would make turkeys? So you're just we're not gonna make a turkey, but we're just gonna place your hand on the page and trace your hand. Does not have to be perfect. Okay, and when you've done that, what I want you to do on the inside of each of those fingers, inside the lines, you're going to list one emotion per finger that you are well acquainted with having when you are stressed or in your grief or both. So for example, you can change the slide, Candace. Now, you don't have to pay attention to what's on these. I just found some illustrations of what I meant by inside the finger. So on the left side where it says introduction, subtopic, just ignore those. But that's inside the finger that I want you to just take one emotion per finger and write it in. So it could be exhaustion on your thumb. It could be first finger. So you should have 5 different emotions. Try to pick ones that are the most challenging for you, that you're the most familiar with feeling. When you're done with that, at the top of each finger, see on the right side where it says main idea, again, you can ignore what's on it, but I just wanted to exemplify where I want you to put the name of an individual at the top of that finger. Somebody who you believe can really support you well, can seem to, in your experience, is good with that particular emotion. Because this is what happens for most of us. Most of us go to one person, maybe 2 people, for just about everything. Could be a partner or a best friend or a colleague. And we usually, without thinking, ask or silently expect them to deal equally well with everything. When in truth, even I am better with some emotions, even though I'm a counselor, than others. In the other, I'll switch it up a little bit and just say that I have one friend who's fantastic if I'm feeling guilty. She's somebody I could call and say, you know, she just helped me figure out where to hide the body. She's just great in a crisis. She's there for me no matter what I've done. If I'm feeling guilty or ashamed, she's fantastic. However, that same fabulous friend, who's a lifelong friend, if I go to her when I'm confused, she'll say often, oh, I wish I knew what to say. And that just makes me feel worse. So she's great with some things. So I would put Amy on the finger of guilt, but I would put, if I'm feeling confused, I would put my friend Cheryl down, because she's fantastic in helping me get out of some confusion or if I'm stuck. So this exercise as well is something you can change up. You can add, hopefully you can add more than one friend per finger. Ideally, you want whoever you're naming on each finger to be somewhat different. And if you don't know who could be there with you, because either you don't have any experience of someone being great with that emotion, or you're just not sure, you can ask somebody. You can say, hey, I was doing this exercise today, and I realize I don't have anybody to talk to when I'm feeling guilty. Can I come to you when I'm feeling like that and kind of see how it goes? Would you be comfortable? So that is the intention of that exercise, is simply to build your support system in a way that is meaningful to you. What your hand looks like, literally and figuratively, somebody else's won't look like. And that's as it should be. Everybody has different emotions, different people they can go to with that. And if you don't know anybody, put me down. You can call me if you're feeling like that. I'm well acquainted with just about every emotion you can think of. And while yes, I'm human and I might do some emotions better than others, certainly in my professional role, I can do all of them equally well. Okay, next slide, Candace. So I just simply want to wrap up by saying that as each of you cares for others, please remember for yourselves. And I'll show you one way to do that. And I'll tell you a little bit about how I work. If you could, the next slide, Candace. So if you need support for grief, for your stress, I am the owner of the Jacksonville Center for Grief and Loss. I also, of course, work at AgeWell, but in this particular role, I am in private practice. You can write to me at the jackcenterforgrief@gmail.com. I answer every email I get. That is my cell phone number, so I will give you my cell phone number and trust you with it. I am available to anyone who needs support for grief, loss, change, stress, and I have what's called a sliding scale, which means I'm not doing this for the money. I have a full-time job for that through Baptist Health. This is a passion of mine. It's something I've been doing for over 25 years, and if you need support for grief and stress, we will make the financial part of it work. That's my commitment. So please know that you have at least one person. I know there are many more. There are lots of different resources that Candace will be sharing with you. And the Caregiver Coalition is a wonderful support as well. But if you need some one-on-one support, I am working virtually, so no risk to you. I do have an office, but I haven't been using it because of the risk out there. So I'll wrap it up. I think we're just about at my time to, yeah, we are at 10:40. So let me ping it to Candace and see what we're going to do next.
You've got perfect timing, Rachel.
Good. Good.
So thank you for sharing all of that. I think that as caregivers, handling difficult emotions kind of comes as its own challenge. Having to, when you're feeling things like anger and guilt and resentment, and it seems like cyclical, that you feel guilty for being angry and then angry for being guilty. It's like one after the other. So having an outlet to process these emotions is so important. So thank you, Rachel. I am going to open it up for Q&A. I did have a question in the chat while we were doing the hand tracing exercise. What if you're doing the exercise and you find that you don't have somebody to add to these fingers? You have these emotions, but you don't have anyone who either you're comfortable with sharing these things, or just plain don't have somebody there.
So it's a great question. So one thing that I tell people to do who have nobody is to find a professional, and put that person in every finger, because if that person is a professional, even if it's a crisis hotline, so I'm not talking about a self-serving answer by saying, you know, put me down for everything and call me. It could be a toll-free hotline. There are resources in our community, and I can, if you don't already have those available, I can follow up with that. But my suggestion is to find an expert whose job it is to sit equally well with each of those emotions, who is trained to support you, who won't find it to be a burden, and who has the ability to be as patient and available as they can, who won't just say, oh, it's not a good time.
Mm-hmm. Right. I think an expert and the importance of support groups.
Absolutely.
That was kind of a question I had, is for those who have been averse to support groups, or who, you know, like you had said, may not be comfortable sharing. Well, we definitely encourage joining a support group for the camaraderie, again, for getting these things off your chest. What are a couple things that somebody should be looking for? Maybe they go to a support group for the first time to kind of test it out and see how they feel. What would you recommend somebody kind of pay attention to see if this is the right group for them?
So one thing I want to say about groups is not everybody is a group joiner. I happen to not be, and it's okay. I've been part of groups, however, that I found to be really impactful. It's just not my natural way. When I have joined a group, I look for a couple of things, and I would encourage everybody to do the same. One, that's really, it's almost like going on a blind date. You at least want to feel the relationship should solidify and become more familiar and easier and more trusting over time. But even at that first session, you should feel like that person has some gentle command of the group, where they can set a tone in the group that is comfortable to you, that isn't abrasive or dismissive in any way, that you feel like in their presence you're well taken care of. So they should simply lend that feeling to you and have some degree of the ability to facilitate interaction without being, you don't want somebody who talks too much, but you want somebody who can redirect as needed. If somebody is disruptive in any way to the group, that you can kind of lean on to as the leader. So a good group leader will be able to do that. And in terms of the group itself, you want to feel like this is a group that you have something you can relate to. Only one way of being in a group is to contribute verbally. Another way is to listen. A lot of us get the most from just listening to other people that we can relate to. It's not necessarily from the active sharing part. A lot of people are just reluctant to do that. And ideally, you want a group facilitator who doesn't force that, who gives you the option of contributing as much or as little as you want to, mindful of time. That's the one thing about one-on-one support versus group support that I personally like. For me, one-on-one support gives you the floor the whole time. And in a group, you have to divide and share that time. But the bonus of having a group versus one-on-one is that you get to hear other people who have similar circumstances, and it can keep you from feeling isolated and alone in your issues. So they both. Hopefully that answers that question. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Rachel. I had a question for, are there any nutritional supplements, and if so, what are they, that can support the imbalance of cortisol, DHEA, and neutrophils?
Oh, what a great question. So I would, there absolutely are. I am not the expert in that, but I do have access to a naturopath. He's fantastic. He lives in the Jacksonville area. I think he's at the beach, and he has a practice that I know he works a lot with Baptist Health cancer patients and helping them to through supplements to minimize their oncology, but also in all other kinds of issues. So I would defer that answer to him, but the answer for sure is yes. There are some, this I know about, that there is, you can take pure DHEA externally to try to feed it to your body, but the data on whether or not that in that form, at least the over-the-counter ones, are effective is out. They're not so strong, I should say. So, but yes, the answer is yes, for sure, with cortisol and neutrophilic and DHEA strength.
That's super interesting.
Yeah, what a good question.
Are you familiar with adaptogens, things like ashwagandha root?
Yeah.
They're natural herbal supplements that I have done before. I love, you know, being able to deal with things naturally, but they kind of work in your body to regulate things like your hormones, your blood pressure, you know. Obviously,
or
let your doctor know and talk to your doctor, you know, to make sure
exactly
you don't need to be,
right.
You know, if you have a really high blood pressure, you probably need to look at, you know, a different medication or something. But, you know,
I think the one thing to remember about natural supplements is that even though they're natural, they can have side effects that in some cases can be really detrimental or even toxic. So, you know, when people say, oh, but it's natural, it's like, well, arsenic is natural. So you have to be mindful of what you're taking and what it could interact with that could, you know, that could be potentially detrimental. Even natural supplements interacting with other natural supplements sometimes. So yes, definitely best to not only talk to your medical doctor, but also to consult a naturopath who, it's one of the things I like about the gentleman that I mentioned, because he works with and not against or instead of Western medicine. I heard an echo, sorry.
We got it.
Yeah. So ideally you want a blend of somebody who is not going to be in competition of anything that a Western medicine doctor, an MD, might recommend. So a naturopathic doctor, an ND, and an MD should ideally be working together.
I have a couple requests in the chat. If you could share the contact info.
Sure.
Of the naturopath.
Oh, yes.
If you
do you want me to get that to you, Candace, afterward, or how can I do that?
I will send it out via an email.
Okay.
Out an email that's going to have resources. It's going to have a PDF copy of these slides.
Okay.
The URL for the recording.
Okay.
That we're going to post this workshop to YouTube. And then it's going to have other support resources, things that Rachel kind of mentioned. I've been working on gathering a list of support groups here locally, specifically ones that have gone virtual.
Okay.
We have some mental health hotlines. So I'm going to put everything into the email, Rachel, if you want to send me the contact information, and I'll
absolutely
in the email.
Happy to do that. Happy to do that.
All right. So I will go through. I've got a few more questions. I had someone who said, this is my first time and I am enjoying it. Welcome.
Oh, yay.
She has questions, but will contact you directly. What are your available times?
Flexible, particularly evenings and weekends, but I can, because I'm working through Baptist virtually, I can easily factor that into someone's need into my daytime schedule too. So it's a lot more flexible than it used to be. So please don't hesitate to reach out to me and call, text, email, smoke signals. I'll make it work.
I love that you make yourself so available, Rachel. I think that's really important for caregivers to know that there's we're not just floating heads here posting on social media and
my phone never goes off. I mean, when people are in stress and in grief, their needs are not 9 to 5. So my availability is not only 9 to 5 either.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
And I have a lot of thank yous in the chat too. Someone said that's very informative and helpful. Thank you for the idea.
I'm so glad.
I had Rachel is amazing. Thank you for this gift of a webinar. So lots of compliments for you, Rachel. Thank you.
Oh, sweet. Thank you. That's so nice.
So I had a question that's a little bit specific, but I think it's probably very relevant to a lot of caregivers. She said, my mother who has Alzheimer's isn't comfortable with anyone coming in the house that she doesn't know. And it's harder and harder for my husband and I to find a little time together. Do you have suggestions?
That's a really common one. So one is to familiarize. So I have more questions that can't be answered because this is a one-way, it's a monologue versus a dialogue. Who could become familiar over time, somebody who comes in for a moment, almost like, when you get, if you're a parent to a young child, or if you have, and in no way am I comparing these circumstances, but if I have a new pet care person come in, I want to get my animal used to that person before I leave the house and just have him or her come in. So I'm wondering if there's a way to start familiarizing your mother with someone who briefly comes in and leaves and then maybe spends a little more time the next time. If that would be possible, that could be one solution. And the other might be, are there times when your mother is otherwise occupied, whether it's taking a nap or sleep for the night, that you could have another person come in and be available, but you can have alone time with your husband. So I'm wondering about both options and maybe in combination.
Mm-hmm. Good suggestions. We're getting short on time, but I think this is a really great question. Our loved ones are also dealing with this stress and grief. How can we help them, especially if they deal with moderate dementia?
Oh gosh, so I'm so glad that question came up, because I forgot to mention that the using your senses, those kinds of solutions are not just for you, they're also for your loved one, particularly those with dementia. So even though they can't identify for themselves all of the personal pleasures they have through their senses, music, calming music, particularly in headphones, there's a fabulous documentary on that subject, and it's escaping me right now, but I know the whole thing is viewable on YouTube, just about the power of finding music from their era, or something that with a song that was, but each of those having something pleasing to their touch, gentle touches or soft fabrics or something to hold. Aromatherapy, something to lower their blood pressure naturally through the scent of lavender. So I would say that the exercise is that we did around the senses is for your loved ones too. That's just one idea, but certainly being mindful for everything that could be a potential stress relief for you in the way of indulging your senses, to consider how you could adapt that for your loved one as well.
Mm-hmm. And I think another good thing to mention on that point is how important engagement is for someone who's living with dementia.
Absolutely.
If a person is feeling stress.
That's right.
And feeling negative emotions, at times that could be related to feeling either maybe an awareness that they don't feel normal, that they feel like something,
of course,
don't know what it is,
of course,
or feeling like they're not useful. It's really important to continue to make your loved one feel important, feel helpful, small tasks around the house that, even if it's folding socks or folding laundry, even if you have to go behind them and do it again, it's feeling like they're useful, feeling like they're doing something, having a sense of purpose.
That's right.
Important.
It's hard enough in general, but now during these times when we're so much more isolated, when they are so much more isolated, particularly those in memory care, or just with an inability to go out and about as freely. So it's hard in normal circumstances, but these are extraordinary circumstances.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I'm going to have to wrap up the discussion, but I encourage you, anyone watching, or even anyone that maybe isn't joining us live and is going to watch the recording, Rachel's contact information is here. Reach out. Rachel, I really appreciate how available you've made yourself.
Absolutely.
When that availability is, So thank you everybody for watching. Thanks, Rachel, for chatting with us this Saturday.
Absolutely. Happy to come back anytime I'm asked.
I do have some more thank yous in the group chat, Rachel.
Thank you, everybody.
Everybody appreciates you spending.
That's so sweet. Thank you, everybody. I loved being with you today. Thank you.
So coming up on kind of the end of our workshop, what we regularly do is send out a poll to everyone that's viewing. So I'm going to go ahead and send that out now. So if you're joining us on your desktop or maybe on your tablet with the Zoom app, you should see a post evaluation come up right on your screen. It's short, it's quick, it's only, it's 5 questions, and it helps us continue to improve these sessions and make sure that they stay relevant to you, make sure that they stay accessible to you. And anyone that answers the poll is entered to win a $50 Amazon gift card. I will randomly draw the name after the session and send you an email, with whatever email you use to register. And I've been emailing people and confirming that the email works and that they got it, and then sending the gift card. So just stay tuned for that. And while everyone is taking this poll, oh, that was you. While you're taking the poll, I just want to announce about our next session, which I'm really excited about. So in years past, the Caregiver Coalition has been able to dedicate an entire conference to honoring our military, our veterans, and those who care for them. And we had originally planned on doing the same thing this year. And we were already planning the special day long before COVID-19 brought everything to a halt. Rachel's on our events committee. We were planning in January what we wanted to do for veterans in September. But of course, plans change and we have to learn and adapt to these changes as they come. But as a coalition, we knew we had to create something to bring this special group of caregivers together and acknowledge the unique challenges and honor our active military and veterans. So I'm super excited to announce that next month, we're going to continue our tradition of holding a Caring for the Military and Veteran Caregiver Conference. But this year we will, of course, be virtual. Friday, September 25th, we'll be hosting several virtual workshops throughout the morning. And among our incredible experts and unique speakers, Deborah Grassman, who's a name that you will probably recognize. She's with Opus Peace, and she's a return speaker, and she's fantastic. And I'm really excited to say that she will continue her tradition of joining us to speak about the emotional challenges that our veterans face and bring words of encouragement and words of healing to everyone that can join us. So I really hope that you'll be able to join us. We're also going to have the VA there to talk about benefits and their caregiver support program. There have been a few changes because of COVID to allow for increased support. So you can join us to hear about that. We have Catherine Thomas with Yoga for Change. She's the executive director there. And she is a veteran too. So she'll talk about mindfulness and self-care and how that has helped her. And we'll also have Peter Rosenberger, who's a comedian. You might have heard of him. He's the one who did the You Know You're a Caregiver If program. So he's going to close this out with a little bit of comedy, a little bit of, uplift. And if you would like to get more details about this, about our whole program for this day, go to our website, caregivercoalition.org, and subscribe to our Caring Together newsletter. I promise I try not to spam your inbox with emails, but this is the best way to stay in touch with us. We'll send out details for all of these sessions and what time they're going to happen and the registration links and everything. So be sure to stay in touch with us. You can also like us on Facebook. That way you can see updates right on your news feed. It's facebook.com/Caregiver Coalition NEFL. And if you guys have any other questions, you can reach out to me directly, or if there are questions for Rachel, you can reach out to Rachel. You can visit our website if you have questions for me, caregivercoalition.org, and scroll all the way to the bottom, and there's a question or comments box, and those messages get sent straight to my inbox. So I will answer them as soon as I can. So thank you so much. Rachel is sending me right now the information for the naturopathic, oh, that's a hard word for me, naturopathic doctor. She's going to send it to me via email, so I'll make sure that everybody has that if you're interested in reaching out to him. But I think that wraps us up for today's session. So again, Rachel, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for
My pleasure.
Discussion with us. And to our caregivers, thank you guys, everyone viewing, thank you for guiding this discussion and kind of leading us on what we're going to talk about and the questions. I think it was really great. I learned a lot. So thank you, everybody, so much for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your Saturday.